Hello and welcome to this online class. We are on chapter number 1 and we are trying to understand what is this discipline of psychology all about. We have done definition of psychology. We know certain keywords related to the definition. We have also understood the major themes which are important for the field of psychology. Today we are going to learn some important schools of psychology. I know you must be wondering what is the meaning of school in psychology. So let me first explain to you what do we understand by school, then we'll go further. A school refers to a group of people, particularly writers, artists, or philosophers, sharing similar ideas or methods. The word school has multiple meanings. One meaning of the word school is known to you through the educational institution to which you go to study. But there are other meanings of the word school as well. When it comes to subjects, when it comes to higher studies, what we learn is that within a particular discipline or subject, there are multiple groups of people. There are many groups of people who think alike. So within psychology, within the subject of psychology, we have many groups of people. All the people belonging to one group, out of the so many groups available, those who belong to one group, they think in similar ways. So school refers to a collection of people, a group of people who think in similar ways or who use similar methods to answer their questions. School can also be understood as an approach, a way of looking at things, an approach, a perspective, a style of thinking. Let me give you an analogy to understand the meaning of the word school in a better way. Just imagine yourself in a big room with many windows. Outside this room is a garden, and this garden is a big garden, and the room also is a big room with many windows. From each of the windows, you can look out and have a very different view of the garden. Okay, so if you look at the garden from each of these windows, you get to see a very different view of the garden. So, what you see, which part of the garden you look at, depends on which of the windows are you looking through. So, this is how schools can be understood in psychology. When we talk about schools, we refer to a particular approach, a certain approach to think about certain psychological concepts. This will get clearer as we move further in this lesson. Here is the list of schools, major schools in psychology: Structuralism, Functionalism, Behaviorism, Psychoanalysis, Gestalt, and Humanistic. So these are some of the major schools in psychology. And remember, we know that school is a group of people. So each of these schools has a group of people who share certain commonalities regarding their understanding of mental processes or behaviors, and who also share certain commonalities regarding how to study mental processes and behaviors. So, a school is a group of people in psychology who share a view of mental processes and behaviors, and they also share commonalities regarding how to study behavior and mental processes. So within a school, there are people who agree upon what to study and how to study. So what to study refers to the kind of mental processes or behaviors they want to study, and how to study entails or includes the methods that they have agreed upon to use in order to study mental processes and behaviors. Let us now start with The first school, that is structuralism. Structuralism, as I told you, was the first school of psychology. This was the first time that psychologists came together and formed a group or a school which is called structuralism. But the question is, what existed before structuralism? Was there no psychology before structuralism? Before the first school or before the first collection of people coming together to study psychology, was there no psychology before? It was very much there. Psychology was very much there, but the questions of psychology were studied through biology or philosophy. So, all that is understood as psychology today was being thought of within a discipline called philosophy and biology. Human being consists of a body and a mind. As I told you in the very first lecture, there is a body and there is a mind. There is a brain and there is a mind. There is a physiology and there is a mind. So human being is composed of two things. One is the physiological component and the other is the mental component. Now, questions related to human beings were answered before structuralism through biology and philosophy. The questions related to the physical being of human beings was answered through biology, and questions related to the mental being of the human beings or the mental part of the human beings was taken up by the discipline of philosophy. It was in the year 1879 that Wilhelm Wundt, a psychologist, opened the first psychological laboratory in the University of Leipzig, Germany. So it was in 1879 that psychology as a discipline or as a subject of study separate from philosophy and biology started to appear. So it was all because of the efforts of people like Wilhelm Wundt. Wilhelm Wundt and Edward B. Titchener are the pioneers of this school called structuralism. Structuralism established the discipline of psychology or the subject of psychology as having an identity of its own as separate from philosophy and biology. This, therefore, structuralism marks the formal beginning of modern psychology. Structuralists wanted to study the conscious experience or the mind. They defined psychology as the study of conscious experience. We are at the fourth bullet point, which says that structuralism defined psychology as the study of conscious experience. So they wanted to, as the name suggests, structuralism. They wanted to look at the structure of conscious experience or the structure of mind. So they were interested in knowing the building blocks or the structure of the mind. And these building blocks, they identified the building blocks of mind or conscious experience as sensations, feelings, and images. Since they were interested to know the structure of the mind, they wanted to know what were the constituents of mind or the conscious experience. And these constituents, they defined these constituents of mind or the structures which comprised conscious experience of mind as sensations, feelings, and images. Structuralism also is famous for a method which was used by structuralists to study the conscious experience. This method is called introspection. Introspection is a method where the person is asked to report to the experimenter about his or her sensations, feelings, or images in controlled laboratory conditions. So, this is a method which was used by structuralists to study the conscious mind. And this method of introspection could not be verified by others because the person who was going through these sensations or feelings or images was reporting these things. Nobody from outside could observe what was happening in the conscious experience of the person who was reporting. That is why introspective accounts, if you look at the last pointer, introspective accounts could not be verified by outside observers, hence criticized by other psychologists. So, introspection, because it was a very subjective kind of process, nobody from outside could verify whether the person who's reporting about his or her sensations, images, and feelings is providing a correct report or not. It was not an objective method. Introspection was criticized by other psychologists, and this criticism of the method of introspection led to another school in psychology. So, when people realized that no, structuralism is not helping us to understand the mental processes going on within the individual, then what? So they came up with another alternative, which is the next school of psychology, which is called the functionalism. Functionalism has William James and John Dewey as pioneers. So they started this school of functionalism. As I told you, functionalism grew out of the criticisms towards the structuralist school. The drawbacks or the shortcomings of structuralist school of psychology gave rise to this another school, which is called the functionalism. Now, just as structuralism comes from the word structure, functionalism comes from the word function. The structuralist school or the structuralists wanted to identify the structure of the mind, but the functionalists wanted to look at the function that mental processes or conscious experience served to the individual. So they were interested in finding out not the structure of conscious experience but the function of conscious experience. So they wanted to know what function was the conscious experience or the mind serving to an individual. William James proposed that consciousness or mind is an ongoing stream of mental processes interacting with the environment. So, structuralism, people like William James believed that mental processes have the function of adaptation to the environment. So, our mental processes, what they do, they serve the function of enabling us to adapt to our changing environment. If you look around yourself, there are always changes occurring in your environment. The weather changes, the time of the day changes, people around you, they change. When you come to school, there are other people. When you to go back home, there are other set of people with whom you are interacting. Right now we are in the COVID lockdown situation, so this is another situation with which we have to adapt. So this is how functionalists looked at human being and human being's environment. They looked at the environment as ever changing and consciousness or mind of the human being as always adapting to the environmental changes. So, as functionalists, they wanted to study the purpose that mental processes or conscious experience or consciousness or mind was serving to the person. According to them, consciousness or the mind or mental processes of the mind, they serve an important function of adaptation for the individual. So they wanted to understand or study this adaptive function of the mind and not the building blocks of consciousness like the structuralists. You remember, structuralists wanted to study the structure of the mind. Functionalists, on the other hand, wanted to study the purpose that mind or mental processes serve to the individual's adaptation to the environment. Hence, they got the name functionalism. So, functionalism is a school of thought that came after structuralism, and they wanted to study the function that mind or mental processes served to help the individual adapt to the changing environment. Interestingly, there were criticisms of both structuralism and functionalism because what they studied, the conscious experience, could not be observed from outside. It was not of objective nature. You remember we studied about subjective and objective? While trying to understand the meaning of experiences, we learned that experiences are subjective, and there we also understood what is meant by subjective by contrasting subjective with the objective. So, whatever is observable, whatever can be observed, measured, is called objective. Whatever cannot be observed from outside or measured is called subjective. For example, your height, your weight is an objective parameter or an objective quality. It can be measured by people. You can be seen growing up in height. You can be seen gaining weight. But your mental processes are subjective. The way you plan for your studies, the way you plan for your upcoming exams, your study strategy, your capacity to memorize, all these are subjective qualities. They cannot be seen from outside, they cannot be observed from outside. So they are of subjective nature. So structuralism and functionalism was criticized for its subjective nature. What the structuralists studied, the conscious experience, and particularly the method employed by structuralists, the method of introspection, was criticized heavily, and there was dissatisfaction among psychologists for how psychology was progressing. So, what happened eventually was that they came up with another school which is called behaviorism. Behaviorism has John Watson and B.F. Skinner as pioneers. Behaviorists rejected the structuralist and functionalist idea of psychology as the study of conscious experience or consciousness. We have understood that structuralists and functionalists defined psychology as the study of consciousness or conscious experience or the mental processes of which the person is conscious of. Behaviorists, on the other hand, define psychology as the study of observable behavior or responses to stimuli which can be measured and studied objectively. Now, here we need to understand that behaviorists redefine psychology as the study of something which is observable. So, they changed psychology as the study of observable behaviors, behaviors which can be observed from outside. You remember we have done the definition of behavior. We know that behavior is any activity which the organism or the person engages in. Now, if you look at the second bullet point, it says that behaviorism defined psychology as the study of observable behavior or responses to stimuli which can be measured and studied objectively. So here we have two new words which we can understand very easily, which are stimuli and responses. Now, what is stimuli and what is response? Stimulus is singular, and stimuli refers to plural of the word stimulus. So stimulus or stimuli are well-defined elements in the environment affecting the organism which may lead to an overt or covert response. So any element in the environment that results in a response, in a behavior, in an action by the organism or the person is called as stimulus. Something that triggers an action on the part of the organism is called stimulus. For example, sound, light, examination are stimuli because they result in a response from you. If there is too much light, you respond by blinking your eyes. If there is too much sound, even then you try to shut your ears. You give a response to a very loud sound. You give a response to a very bright light or a very dim light. If the light is very dim, you will try to brighten up the room. So they are all stimuli because they evoke a response, they create a response, they result in a response from your side. Response, on the other hand, can be understood as any action or reaction a person or animal makes in response to a stimulus. is called response. So what is response? The action that you engage in as a result of a stimulus is called response. Stimulus is something that triggers an action, and that action as a result of a particular stimulus is called the response. For example, a bright light is a stimulus, and you shutting your eyes to a bright light is your response. So light triggers a response from you. Light is a stimulus, bright light is a stimulus, and your action of closing your eyes or blinking your eyes is called response. So behaviorists, what they did, they moved psychology from study of conscious experiences to something which can be observed in terms of stimulus and response. So they started observing behavior in terms of stimulus and response. Whatever the person does is the response, and whatever results in that response is understood as stimulus. That is how behaviorists defined psychology in terms of stimulus response reactions. So they started observing behavior which is observable. And what is behavior? How did they define behavior? Behavior is nothing but the actions which the organism undertakes as a result of the stimulus present around him or her. Going to the last bullet point, behaviorism aimed to study observable behavior. We remember structuralists and functionalists aimed to study conscious experience. Structuralists wanted to identify the structure of conscious experience, the constituents of conscious experience. Functionalists wanted to identify the function of conscious experience or the purpose conscious experience served for the person. Here, behaviorists aim to study observable behavior or behavior that can be observed. So I hope you can notice a shift in the way structuralists, functionalists, and behaviorists define psychology. That is all for today's lecture. We have done 3 schools of psychology: structuralism, functionalism, and behaviorism today. Next lecture will be on the remaining schools. Thank you. Happy learning.